Evening, folks. This old Buster coming to you again. Got a little story about the triplets, and there's some other folks going to read to you tonight. Want to say a howdy to old Steve Peltier. He's our plumber, but he's a good old boy here. We like him right well. He's always doing us a good turn, too. He's just a nice feller, kind heart. Anyhow, this is about Festus, Fergus, and Furel. They're the triplets. Well, now, bless them boys' hearts, they just can't help it. They is Ferny hoes, you know. All the Ferny hoes is kin to Brenniger, and he don't have but an IQ of 35, you know. I know y'all remember Brenniger and his old story. They cousins, you know. Well, the boys figured on making them some money catching some chickens for old man Welch down by their place where he was raising chickens for the Tysons. Well, old man Welch told the boys to come on by right after dark when Purina got done bringing his and feed for the chickens, and they could get on to catching the chickens that was going to be sent up to Tyson's processing plant. Now, whilst Festus, Fergus, and Furel was abiding their time, they figured they would sidle on down towards Jesse's place to see if and Mrs. McBrayer had set out some pies to cook. Now, Buster was a-passing by on the shortcut to the farm when he heard the triplets a-discussing their plan for getting them some fresh-baked pies of Mrs. McBrayer's. Now, Buster made a beeline to his pitching coop to let Swifty fly out with a note to Jesse telling him what was a-coming with Festus, Fergus, and Furel. Well, Buster told Jesse to tell his and Ma to lock all the doors and not to set out the pies and the bread to cool on the windowsill. Well, Swifty was the fastest way to get a message to Jesse because the party line was always busy with women a-lollygagging and a-jabbering. Well, Jesse was down by the barn a-feeding and didn't see Swifty come in. Well, in the meantime, Mrs. McBrayer and the gals had been a-baking for a-doings for Buster's grandma and their other lady friends for their weekly quilting bee. There was going to be a big supper for Walter, Buster, Hired, and their families after the quilting, and the men folk had come in from working in the field and their jobs and whatnot. There'd been a baptizing down at the creek on Sunday, the day for all the gals and all four of the boys' families. The gals all knowed each other right well and went to school together too. So they made up to all of them get baptized together by each of their preachers from the church they went to. It was right smart of a shindig, if and I do say so myself. Well, anyhow, Jesse was too late a warning his and Ma about the triplets, Festus, Fergus, and Furel. Them boys lit into them pies and fresh make bread like nobody's business. They just poked their fingers into a pie and went to a slurping. Reckon it wouldn't have done no good to lock all the doors, seeing how Mrs. McBrayer didn't know where the key was nohow. Well, Mrs. McBrayer seed Festus, Fergus, and Furel eating her pies and fresh-baked bread and let out a yell that would have curled your hair. Maybe curdled milk. She and the gals, Diane and Sandy, grabbed a broom and a mop and a rug beater and lit into them, them Ferny old boys with a vengeance, I tell you. Them boys hightailed it out of there, licking their fingers and a hooting and a hollering. Well, Festus, Fergus, and Furel got to the Welch place right after dark, met up with old man Welch. He told them to gather up 20 chickens to a crate and stack them outside to be picked up around about 2 to 3 a.m. Well, old man Welch asked them if they knowed how to catch chickens, and they said, "Oh, Mr. Welch, we've been a-catching chickens all our life." Well, old man Welch said he would see them in the morning and pay up and called it a night. Well, sir, it wasn't long before a sure enough ruckus got started. About the time old man Welch got to sleep, he got woke up with the dangest carrying on the body ever heard. Old man Welch throwed on his and breeches and lit out to the chicken houses. He had 3 of them, and each one of the triplets was assigned a chicken house to catch the chickens for market. When old man Welch got there was chickens everywhere. Well, Festus, Fergus, and Furel was a-chasing chickens and a-wringing their necks when they caught up with one. There was live chickens a-running helter-skelter, and there was chickens running around with their haze wrung off and a-spraying blood every which place. Now, if you ever see the chicken with his and hay cut off, you know what I mean. There probably wasn't no more than a couple hundred chickens all told left in them 3 chicken houses. Boy, wasn't them boys a mess. Well, Festus would run into one chicken house, and Fergus into another, and Furel into another. Of course, all the doors were left wide open, and chickens was everywhere, I'm a-telling you. Old man Welch was a-having a fit to be tied. He run into the house a-hollering for his family to come catch chickens and get his and shotgun after Festus, Fergus, and Furel. Well, old man Welch could be here at a country mile a-hollering that he would shoot them triplets tighter than a doornail. The next day after the sheriff fetched up Festus, Fergus, and Furel and took 'em up in front of Judge Barry, the word got out that them triplets didn't have sense God give a goose and couldn't be made to pay for the chickens old man Welch had lost. The triplets' ma said that them boys done the best they could do, and old Doc Harris could testify that Festus was cockeyed, Fergus was cross-eyed, and Furel was wall-eyed and just plain didn't know no better. Case dismissed, said Judge Barry, and said he couldn't afford to have 'em on his and chain gang and to keep 'em home, seeing how they was kin to Brenniger and he didn't have but an IQ of 35, you know. And these three boys was pert near worse than him, but not really. They had a better IQ than that, but they sure didn't act like it, that's for sure. As you know, Brenniger and the law done had their run-ins many a time. Well, I reckon the county had the best darn fried chicken dinner a body could have. Folks from miles around come and caught up as many chickens as they could, and they dressed them out. The others that had the next rung was pert near ready to eat and put on the spit or in the pot. Well, folks brung in all manner of fixings, and the frying pans was a-bubbling to beat the band. The Baptist, First Christian, Catholic, and Presbyterian churches opened their doors to meet up and serve fried chickens and all the trimmings. A dance was held that evening in the little home brew in Blue Moon to boot. Well, all in all, it turned out pretty well. Tyson sent some more chickens to old man Welch to make up the difference for what he lost, and most of the county had turned out and had a good time of visiting and a-dancing and plenty to eat. But one thing for sure, Festus, Fergus, and Furel wasn't invited at all. Well, doggone it, not being on the invite list wasn't going to keep Festus, Fergus, and Furel from getting into the mischief. Them triplets was just born for trouble. Well, everybody knowed about them boys by now, was on the lookout for 'em. When them three looked at something, there just wasn't no way to tell what they was a-thinking. They looked at things a mite different than most folks, being they was cockeyed, cross-eyed, and wall-eyed. Them boys just wasn't right in the hate. The boys didn't feel none like sitting around the house, so they figured on visiting their cousin Brenniger for a spell. Well, the triplets caught a ride on a hay wagon and then with a team of mules heading for the woods to do some logging. Well, the feller driving the hay wagon was going on about a boat down on the river where drinks was free, and there was a whole passel of painted women, pretty gals that brung 'em to you. Well, after meeting up with Brenniger, Festus, Fergus, and Furel ciphered on where in the heck that their boat was. Well, Brenniger said he knowed just where it was, and they'd have to take his and Paul's jalopy to get there and be back before dark. Now, his and Pa and Ma went off with some neighbors to butcher a hog and make lye soap, so they had time to get there and back. Well, now, cranking that old Model T sure could take a toll on a feller, you know. Every time one of the triplets would try to crank that old Model T's motor, it would throw him for a loop. Well, time Brenniger got it started, Festus, Fergus, and Furel was plumb tuckered out and bruised up something fierce. That dang crank was a-harming 'em, black and blue from head to toe. Well, Brenniger done the driving since Festus, Fergus, and Furel ain't never done no driving before. They got on down to the river where this here boat was. It was a gambling boat, but not exactly legal like, you know. Well, Buster's Uncle Archie got killed on this very boat a while back whilst he was a-drinking right smart and spooning some gal down there. Well, old Archie took a shine to the gal, and it was told her and some of her nefarious fellers waylaid him and pulled a bullet right betwixt his and eyes. This here boat wasn't for the faint of heart, I tell you. Well, anyhow, Brenniger, Festus, Fergus, and Furel went on into the boat, and their eyeballs rolled back like window shades with the sights. Ain't none of 'em ever seen the like of anything like that there boat. Lights was a-blinking and a-flashing and bells a-ringing, and the gals was a sight for sore eyes. They was painted up and scantily clad. The boys had about six bits betwixt them, the four of them that is, and didn't rightly know what to do when they got on the boat. Well, Furel eyed the gal and asked her if he could have one of them there free drinks. She told him he had to play one of them gambling games if he wanted a free drink, and would bring him as many as he wanted as long as he was a-playing. Well, Fergus done see this there wheel a-spinning, and that there wheel caught his an eye for sure. He told Furel to put 2 bits on a number like the other folks was a-doing and get 'em all a free drink. Well, Festus piped up and told Furel to put his and 2 bits on them 2 green alts. Well, he done just see it now. Lo and behold, that there little ball landed right smack dab in the slot for them 2 green alts. Well, danged if Furel hadn't done one, that's what the feller told him of doing the spinning on the wheel. Well, Furel got paid 35 to 1, the feller said. Heck, fire, that there was $8.75. That was more than Festus, Fergus, and Furel made in a month with them a-making 2 bits a week. Well, this here roulette was just like picking apples off in a tree, they said. The feller spinning the wheel hollered to place their bets, but before Furel could get his and money, the feller was a-spinning out their wheel again. You just ain't gonna believe this here tale at all, but that little ball landed on them 2 green alts again. Well, the feller spinning the wheel said, "You win again." And this time Furel told the feller he wanted his and money. The feller give Furel a bunch of chips and told him he could cash 'em in at the cashier's window. With $306.25 in his pocket, Furel figured he was set for life. Being as he wasn't a greedy type feller, Furel give Festus, Fergus, and Brenniger $50 apiece. Boy, they was all in hog heaven, I tell you. Now, not knowing the lay of the land, Furel didn't know that the pit boss had spoke to the gal a serving Furel them free drinks he was a-downing. Well, Furel had took a shine to the little red-headed filly, and she sure enough was a-taking advantage of courting advances. She was to get the money back Furel had won howsomever she could. Whilst that little red-headed gal got Furel to playing other games he didn't know nothing about, Fergus was a-playing a game called the blackjack, with real pretty cards with pictures on them. First off, he done put $25 down on the table, when the gal a-dealing told him it was a minimum bet to sit at the table. Of course, another gal serving drinks had told him too that he had to play to get them free drinks, so he give the gal the money. Well, now it gets real interesting here now, folks. Fergus got an ace and a king, and danged if he didn't win. Well, Fergus had got to drinking stuff something called tequila that kind of tasted like coal oil, but grew on a feller, you know. He didn't know to pick up chips, so he let her ride, as they say. Well, the gal a-dealing old Fergus 2 jacks and asked him if he wanted to double down. Well, Fergus looked at the gal serving him drinks, and she told him to go for it since he was like a deer in headlights. He did, and he won. Well, Fergus was right partial to them blonde-headed gals, and she stayed right there with him, a-gouging Fergus to keep on a-playing. Fergus wasn't going to pay no never mind to nobody till Brenniger and Festus come up. They pert near had to hog-tie old Fergus, but he went off with them. Fergus had done won 23 straight hands up to that time, and probably wouldn't have left if that blonde-headed gal hadn't gone off somewheres and left the table. Well, he didn't come from Sikkim about no blackjack game, and when he was a-betting his figuring wasn't quite right, seeing as they was cross-eyed. The boy was luckier than an outhouse cat, I'm a-telling you. Rat, too. Fergus had a whole passel of them chips, and the gal dealing give him lots of them, he said, and had to have one of them buckets to carry them in. Them buckets is what they use for the coins of them one-armed bandits called a slot machine. Well, Festus had done found himself a table where they was a chunk of these here dice, and was plumb took with the notion, and just had to have Fergus and Brenner along with him to have some fun. Well, Fergus looked on for a bit, but just didn't get the hang of that there game, and went on off to find Furel. He told Festus and Brenniger that he'd find Furel and fetch him on back. Now Festus, being cockeyed and all, didn't see as how all them numbers matched up and told the feller handling the dice to put his money on them squared with all the dots, all $50. Well, that was boxcars, double sixes that paid 30 to 1. Some feller and his gal was a-tossin' them dice, and she blowed on 'em just before he throwed 'em. Well, sir, danged if them dice didn't come up with them 2 sixes called boxcars. Now, old Festus was just a-jumping up and down and said to do it again. Sure enough, them boxcars done come up again. Well, everybody around the table was a-hollering for Festus to take his money, but the pit boss told Festus if Festus would bet them boxcars again, he would give him a free room and all of his brothers and Brenniger could eat. Well, Festus told the feller the bet was on, and then the feller throwing the dice was beginning to get ready to roll the dice again. But old Festus said, "Hold on up there for a minute." Well, Festus told the feller to let his gal blow on them there dice again. The feller just grinned and told the gal with him, "Darling, blow us some luck." And he put $100 on them boxcars himself. It was plumb exciting, and folks was gathered round so the body couldn't get close enough to see what was a-happening. Then the feller let them dice fly. The suspense in the air was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Seemed like all the bigwigs in the gambling boat was there a-watching too. Them dice went to a-sailing through the air and began to roll. One of them dice rolled over to a 6, and the crowd oohed and awed. The other die hit the backboard and bounced back and looked like it was all over for Festus. His luck done run out. But then that die kind of toppled on over on its corner and landed face up as a 6. The crowd went wild, I tell you. The feller that throwed the dice kissed old Festus's head, and the feller's gal hugged Festus up something fierce. About that time, Furel and Fergus come up, and they grabbed up Festus, and Brenniger and Furel told Festus to gather up his money, which he done it. Now, Festus started out with $50, and then turned it into $1,500 at 30 to 1. Then he let it ride and let that $1,500 turn into $45,000, and then that $45,000 went to, $1,355,000. That 30 to 1 3 times made old Festus, like I say, $1,350,000. Well now, let me just get on down here to tell you the rest of this story. The gambling folks wasn't none too happy about paying out Festus, but with everybody looking at Festus getting his big payout, the gambling boat folks had to pay. And they was figuring on something else, I'm here to tell you. They's nefarious like. The boys got a croaker sack and put all their money in it and went to supper since the feller told him they could eat all they wanted to in their field. The boys had them a meal of a lifetime and even stuffed their pockets and the croaker sack with what they couldn't eat. Well, after their supper, Brenniger told the boys they had to get on back to the house before his folks got back from butchering the hog and making lye soap. The triplets wanted to stay, but Brenniger hunkered down and told them their ma and pa would tan their hides if they didn't get going. Well, just before the boys was getting ready to leave out, the feller from the crap table that was throwing the dice come up to the boys and told them they was going to be robbed and maybe killed for their money they won. Well, all the boys looked at him in wonderment and told him that just wasn't right, and what did he think they ought to do? The feller asked them if they hadn't any guns, and the boys said, well, they didn't have none with them, but had some squirrel rabbit guns back at the house. Well, that wasn't going to do no good back there, he said, and y'all got to do something from getting robbed and killed. Well, Festus, being cockeyed and all, lifted that there right eyebrow of his'n and told the boys he had an ID. Well, Brenniger said he had an IQ of 35 and would tell him if the ID was any good or not. Well, Festus said it looked to him like the folks had lost their hard-earned money at the gambling boat. Fergus said he seed one feller squalling about paying his rent. Well, Furel said he run up again that there gal he took a shine to, and she told him the gambling boat fellers was crooked as a barrel of snakes and was fleecing folks. Well, she told him they was making her do things she didn't want to by threatening harm and grief. The gal's name was Albemarle Magine Estes, and she was kin to the Tiptons out in Tipter Holler by Beattyville. Well, Brenniger piped up and said she had to be kin to Buster and Jesse being a Estes and all. Now don't that beat all? Well, that would gag a gopher with what all them crooks was up to. Well, boys, looks like we'd be in the pickle we got ourselves into, said Furel. What you reckon we ought to do? Well, Festus and Brenniger and Furel, him being the stoutest and the best tussler, ought to get the jalopy and get her started up, and him and Fergus would get the folks in the gambling boat to follow them to the jalopy, and they could get away. Well, that seemed like a good idea, said Brenniger, but just how you going to get them folks to follow her? Y'all on out to the jalopy. Well, I got a notion, said Festus. Now y'all get. Well, Brenniger and Furel lit a shuck back for the jalopy, and two big goons took on out after them. About that time, Albemarle Mary Jean run up and asked them if she couldn't go with them. Well, Fergus said to follow them on and stay close. Right about then, Festus hollered out, all you folks that lost money, follow us and get some back. Then Festus went to throwing money at the crowd. The crowd went wild as a hammer, and a hooping and a hollering and a grabbing at the money. Festus, Fergus, and Albemarle Mary Jean went to running towards the jalopy with Festus still throwing the money. Them greenbacks was a-flying every which way, and everybody, including the gambling boat fellers, was a-grabbing for the money. The crowd got plumb crazy when they seed the crooks a-getting their money and went to whooping up on them and a-hollering to tar and feathering them. Well, in the meantime, Furel let into them two goons that was after him and Brenniger. They was pretty tough fellers, but no match for Furel. Furel thrashed them good and proper, and both them goons was out like a light. Well, for good measure, Furel caught a holt of cottonmouth and tied them up right there above their hides on a limb. If they got up too quick, they'd sure enough get bit. Well, Festus, Fergus, and Albemarle Mary Jean got in a jalopy and hightailed it out of there lickety-split. Well, sir, old Furel was plumb tongue-tied when he seed Albemarle Mary Jean come a-running up. He went to a-grinning from ear to ear. Whilst on the way to the house, Albemarle Mary Jean told all the boys why she had took to working at the gambling boat. First off, her folks was in bad way for $1. Her pa had got kicked by the neighbor's mule whilst he was a-snaking logs off the right-of-way for the railroad down on McBrayer Springs for the McBrayer distillery. Her pa had to borrow the neighbor's mule since his was ailing. The other reason was Buster's uncle Archie was a favorite of hers, and she wanted to find out who killed him. Well, Furel told her not to never mind and reached into the croaker sack and give her a wad of them greenbacks. She hugged up Furel and kissed him right smack dab on the lips. Furel's first kiss. The boy turned red as a beet and then reached back in and grabbed up another batch of greenbacks and gave them to her and then kissed her proper like. Well, all the boys was a holler shivery and began to tease Furel something awful. The boys let off Albemarle Mary Jean at her paws and went on to Brenniger's place. The boys got to Brenniger's just before his and folks got home. They said they was sorry for being late, but ran into Buster and Jesse's folks and got to visiting. The boys knowed not to tell where they'd been, 'cause they knowed they'd get a licking. Well, Brenniger told the boys they need to talk to Buster and Jesse about what to do with them there greenbacks they won on the gambling boat. All of them decided to sleep on it till morning and go see Buster and Jesse along with their croaker sack of greenbacks. Well, the next morning after corn pone grits, eggs, and salt pork, the boys lit on out to see Buster and Jesse. When Buster seed Brenniger, Festus, and Furel coming, he said, "Oh Lord, what now?" Well, after getting Buster off to the side and telling their story, Buster put all the boys into his and Grandpa's 28 Dodge wooden depot hack and lit out to find Jesse. Well, Buster and Jesse had been a-driving by theirselves since they was 9, and their folks didn't worry none about them there driving. Buster told his and Grandpa he had to see Jesse and would be at the McBrayers for a spell, maybe overnight. When Jesse seed Buster with the triplets and Brenniger, he knowed trouble was a-comin'. His and Ma would have a hissy fit when she seed Festus, Fergus, and Furel. Well, Buster was the only one he knowed that could throttle the likes of them triplets. When Buster pulled up in the yard, he told Jesse to get on in, and then they drove on all down to the creek. Well, after hearing the story, Buster got on the party line, got a hold of his and cousin Albemarle Mary Jean. Well, she sure enough vouchsafed the story at the gambling boat and told Buster that Furel done give her some greenbacks for her folks. Well, Buster told her not to say anything at all or give them greenbacks to her pa till him and Jesse figured all this out. Well, Jesse went to counting the money in the croaker sack whilst Buster and his hands full of keeping Brenniger and the triplets occupied. Sure enough was a handful, I mean to tell you. Well, Buster set the triplets and Brenniger to fishing and seining crawdads, promising them a fish fry and a crawdad boil. They'd be the rest of the afternoon at the creek, so Jesse and Buster had time to decipher on what to do next. Them boys would be a-swimming and a-talking and ain't no, sitting spell beside seining and trying to get the crawdads and fish, I'll tell you. Well, Jesse and Buster know they sure enough didn't need to tell nobody about this and needed to be right smart about what to do. Well, first off, Jesse counted out the money to the tune of $1,277,143. Well, Festus didn't throw as much money away as he thought he did. And Albemarle May Jean said she had counted what Furel gave her and she had $28,064. Seems like the boys give away $44,793 to the folks on the gambling boat to get away from there without being killed, said Jesse. Well, Buster said that was cheap at half the price, and them boys were plumb lucky in more ways than one. Well, Jesse said to Buster that as he seed it, the only way was to invest the money for the triplets and Brenniger. But in what, said Buster? Jesse said he thought several things like land and such. We can get Lawyer Green to look into the land with coal, oil, and gas, and maybe some timber and gold. Buster said, let's get the boys and tell them what all we want to do and see if they like the idea. Well, Buster rounded up the triplets and Brenniger set them down along with them, but they didn't want to hear none about it. All they wanted to do was eat crawdads and catfish. Well, Buster cooked up a mess of both of them on the creek bank, and then, with the might of Uncle George's elderberry wine, got the boys to settle in. They was all rambunctious, you know. Well, Jesse went to explaining all about his and Buster's thinking, but all the boys wanted to know if their places would be paid for, and if a few dollars would be there for living expenses, since times was right hard now for their folks. Like was said, Brenniger didn't have but an IQ of 35, but Festus, Fergus, and Furel wasn't too much far behind him. They just didn't know about no money. The boys up and said they wanted Jesse and Buster to fix it up for them. Well, Jesse said he'd get some papers for them to make their mark on them, and him and Buster would take care of everything. Then the boys and Brenniger just forgot the whole dang thing, except in Furel getting that kiss from Albemarle May Jean. Well, Buster went to see Albemarle May Jean along with Jesse and explained it all to her and told her she needed to do the same thing as the boys with the money, and she asked if Jesse and Buster would do the same for her. They allowed they would. Well, now, as the days passed, Lawyer Green would give Jesse and Buster reports on their investments. Not only was the places paid for and money to be had as a yearly stipend for the folks in the Ferny Hole triplets, Brenniger and his people and Albemarle May Jean and the Estes family, but their investment accounts was growing leaps and bounds. Oil and gas in Oklahoma, gold in Alaska, timber holdings in the South, and in the North Woods and defense contracts with the government, they was paying off in a big way. Well, Jesse and Buster jointly took care of the folks that couldn't take care of themselves, kin and no kin. It just was the right thing to do. Reckon the Lord provides for those that need most. That's what Buster had to say, because 2 words he lived by was do right. Money wasn't happiness for Festus, Fergus, and Furel, or even Brenniger. Even though Brenniger didn't have but an IQ of 35 and the Ferny Hole triplets just a bit more than that, we have to wonder who has it best. Not a care in the world, nary a worry. Every day, a new day of wonderment. Life is good.